Day 203 to 1:15 a.m. Central Area, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. What is this? The noisy woman among the elite soldiers muttered as their entire group slowly succumbed to the pressure. Whether it be those elite soldiers lying in wait or the abnormal ones surrounding Mark, all of them slowly fell onto their knees. Ack! Some began to wail in pain as their head felt like splitting. A plethora of emotions they did not own began to corrode their consciousness, pulling them down to the floor. The weaker ones began to bleed from their noses and ears. Unexpectedly, the majority was still far from completely collapsing. Those who could still move a bit could only gaze at Mark, who hovered above them. It was not the first time. The members of the elite special forces already saw individuals with wings before, especially ones shaped like the wings of a bat. They had dealt with problems involving paranormal anomalies in the past. Some of those incidents include the appearance of demons. And even though they were just humans, their experiences with their job was more than enough to allow them to know. The target the government intended to capture was not just some mutator, and definitely not an evolver. Their target was demon, but not just some demon either. The target known as Mark might have been a demon far outclassed the ones the elite special forces of the Philippines had encountered since the day it was founded. Hovering above the mostly incapacitated soldiers, Mark was rather surprised. His goal here was not to kill but stall time and render the enemy soldiers incapable of fighting temporarily. After all, it would be useless even if General Perez began to lead this place if its manpower became severely incapacitated. Still, Mark did not expect this. Compared to the enemies he used mental attacks before, these members of the elite special forces lasted longer. Some of them could even move even a little bit when the people he used the same attack in the past already passed out by the same amount. Most surprising of all. Demon. The noisy woman's eyes flared with hate as she concluded that Mark was a demon. Demons should not exist, the noisy woman roared as she stood up. This really made Mark surprised. This female soldier was forcefully resisting his mental attack due to her pure anger. Tunia, the other female soldier, the one that conjured flames, called out to the noisy woman. Unexpectedly, she also began to resist Mark's mental attack. No, not only her. Two more soldiers, both among the 5 hiding in the dark, began to stand up. Lila, can you still move? The noisy woman, Tunia, whispered to the flame user. A little. Lila replied. Capture is not possible, Tunia said, glaring at the opponent in the sky. Then we can only do our job. There, Tunia grabbed a different gun from what she initially used. The first gun she had earlier was a standard issue pistol. A Rock Island Armory 1911 series semi-automatic pistol. The weapon Tunia took out from the holster behind her waist was a gun with a model Mark had never seen before. It seemed to be a customized weapon. Unexpectedly, Mark felt uncomfortable after it was unholstered. Go! Tunia shouted. At the same time, the flame user, Lila, waved her hand. Woom! 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 Balls of flame, as large as basketballs, flew towards Mark. Mark could only evade the flames. Even though he would not be harmed by the attack, his clothes would definitely burn. Clang! Swoosh! At the same time, the other 2 soldiers waiting for the opportunity to attack moved. One attacked with a very long chain, while the other shot a crossbow bolt at Mark. Of course, both attacks missed as Mark evaded despite the speed of the attacks. What made Mark frown, however, was the weapons used just now gave the same feeling at the noisy woman's pistol, making Mark rather uncomfortable. The attacks from the 2 men hiding did not bother Mark too much. The most troublesome one was the barrage of fireballs flying his way. Bang! Finally, Tunia made her attack, shooting the strange-looking pistol at Mark. She timed it at the time Mark evaded one of the fireballs. Unexpectedly, the gun sure was strange. It shot at a speed that normal guns should not be able to. Even Tunia was blown back as she shot her weapon. Due to the speed, even though Mark evaded the attack, The left one of his third pair of wings was pierced. If Mark did not activate his future prediction, causing his left eye to glow violet, he would not be able to avoid the attack at all. What the hell? Mark was surprised. His third pair of wings was different from the other two pairs. It was actually ethereal, made of miasma. It existed, yet not at the same time. Thus, although it helped Mark during flight, it could not be hit by most attacks as if it was made of gas. Yet, the wing hit by the bullet actually tore through it like he was hit by a cannon. He could even feel the searing heat left by the bullet after it passed through. Good thing that Mark activated his future prediction, causing his left eye to glow violet, allowing him to see a few moments in the future. He managed to avoid the attack that was about to punch a large hole through his stomach. At this point, Mark turned to Tunia, who finally passed out. It seemed that she was betting on that single shot that she could barely do. Although she was able to shoot her weapon, she could not handle its power. It was the same for the other two soldiers still standing. Mark evaded their attacks, but the more they attacked, the weaker they became. In the end, only the last one standing was Lila. She slumped to her knees as she saw all her comrades either injured or unconscious. Mark landed in front of Lila. His torn misty wings had already recovered. Surely, Lila was scared. It was not surprising. The demon in front of her knocked out everyone without even attacking directly. Even right now, she could feel the mental attack coming from the enemy. Mark wanted to approach Lila to ask a question, but before he was able to. "Stop right there, you demon." A small man appeared and stood on Lila's shoulder. Wearing green clothing, a green hat, and a pair of pointed shoes while standing near a foot tall. It was a green duende. "If you're going to do something bad to her, I'll be your opponent." The green duende exclaimed. Mark squinted. The green duende was saying all those, but his legs were actually shaking mad. Shrugging, Mark turned towards the woman called Tunia before turning back to Lila and the green duende. "Don't worry, I'm not here to kill," Mark said. "If I am, all of them should be dead by now." Mark then left Lila and the green duende as he spotted the thing he was looking for. It was the gun that Tunia used before she passed out. After Tunia was blown away after she attacked, the gun was thrown to the ground, covered in rainwater and mud. Mark did not care, as he squatted down and picked up the gun. Sizzle. TCH. Mark clicked his tongue, enduring the painful burning sensation on his right palm. Despite the pouring rain, he could smell his flesh burning. "Hey! What are you doing? Are you stupid? Why is a demon like you trying to hold a blessed weapon?" Lila shouted, forgetting her fear after she saw what Mark was doing. "Why are you warning him? He's an enemy." Even the green duende reprimanded Lila for saying something stupid herself. Mark could only smile. This Lila sure was different. So different that she managed to have a contract with a green duende that was only supposed to appear before children. Nonetheless, Lila's words answered Mark's suspicion. The gun in his hand, the crossbow and its bolts, and even the chain earlier. All of these were the so-called blessed weapons. "A blessed weapon. This is the first time I saw one," Mark said as he inspected the weapon he picked up, ignoring the fact that his palm was smoking badly. It actually had a name engraved on it with its intricate carvings. Its name was actually Beatrix. It looked like a pistol, but the impact sure was like a hand cannon. But while watching Mark, Lila concluded something. You're not an evil demon," Lila voiced out, with her fear disappearing slowly. "How can you say so?" Mark asked in a lax manner. He did not expect to hear anything more, but Lila actually explained. "Blessed weapons are the bane of demons and evil entities. However, it reacts differently depending on how evil the entity is. A normally evil being would burst into flames after touching one. But you're only getting seared. It's only reacting to the fact that you are a demon." Mark thought about it. Was he evil or not? Well, he might be a bit evil. In the least, he would not attack innocents and kill them for entertainment, unlike most known demons. With those in mind, Mark approached Lila. Here, take care of these kinds of weapons properly. Mark handed the blessed pistol Beatrix to Lila. You guys will definitely need it in the future. Lila and the green duende could only stare at Mark flabbergasted. Mark actually handed them the weapon that could potentially kill him and turned his back on them. However, Lila had no capability to fire this gun at all. Among their group, even though she was noisy, only Tunia could fire it at least once. Lila watched Mark as he began to walk away, looking around as if checking something. Suddenly, he turned back, looking at her. By the way, have I seen you before somewhere? Mark dropped a line which made Lila even more confused. She could only shake her head as she definitely did not meet someone like Mark before. Seeing her answer, Mark scratched his head. With a shrug, he flew away, leaving the area littered with unconscious people. Mark actually wanted to take at least one of those blessed weapons. However, he endured the urge. This place needed these weapons once demons started getting active. As for him and his base, something like this was not that needed. They could defend themselves properly against demonic entities. That was why Mark could only leave. The battle here already ended. The last thing to do was to confront the masterminds. Mark looked at his palm. It was seared black. It was quite unexpected, but the recovery of the burn on his palm was recovering rather slowly than normal. It seemed that his regeneration was affected by the fact that his body was now of a demon's and the injury came from a blessed weapon. Fortunately, his wing that was hit was not among the two first pairs. It would have been troublesome to fly if his physical wings got blown off. After all, flight needed balance. Flying towards the presidential mansion, Mark suddenly stopped as something flashed on his mind. Now I remember where I saw her. No wonder she looked familiar. Mark murmured as he turned back in the direction of Lila. From what Mark remembered, there was one time where a little girl was shown on television for a very unusual phenomenon. Many things around her would get caught on fire for no apparent reason, without anything to cause the fire. It caused quite a stir, and many so-called paranormal specialists were called to investigate, saying rumors and stuff without proper evidence. Yet, one day, the coverage about the girl suddenly stopped. They said that the parents of the girl were concerned about the attention they were getting and requested privacy. But by what it looked like, the last statement seemed far from the truth. The girl was taken away by the Philippine government to be trained as a soldier because of her psychic abilities. And that girl was Lila. Well, now that Mark remembered, that was the last thing to think about before confronting the masterminds. He also needed to end it now. The guys outside might need his help. Day 203 to 1:21 a.m. Defense Line, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. A tank type. At 2 o'clock, we need explosives here. A predator type is making a detour towards the beach. Dispatch it quickly. Watch out. There's an acid belcher at the back. Kill it before it gets close. Quickly dispose of the smaller, infected, before the behemoth-class infecteds arrive. Infected, bats at 10. Bring them down. Along with the sounds of gunfire and rain, those shouts from the team leaders of General Perez's soldiers mixed in with the noise. However, it was something that could not be helped. In front of them, a horde of hundreds, maybe even thousands, of infected rushed in like a torrential flood. The infected horde came in with different appearances, abilities, sizes, speed, and attack patterns. Although most of the infected ran towards the soldiers' gunfire, there were some that behaved far differently. For example, the mutated infected. As time had passed, the mutations of infected had gotten worse and complicated. Their strengths increased while some developed unique methods to hunt their prey. Tank types were very hard to deal with regular firepower. Their mutated skin was hard to pierce through. Worse, those with higher mutation levels could even withstand explosives to a certain extent. Range types were rather complicated to fight. Although these types of mutation had obvious changes in the infected's body, like an acid sac below their throats or bloated chests, it was hard to find them within hordes of infected. There was also the issue with these types where different mutations have different attacks, and there was a wide variety of them. Hunter types was the fastest kind. At first, these mutations were not that much of a pain to deal with. Although they were faster than most infected, they had smaller statures and were easy to kill because they behaved no different from a regular one. As time went on, however, these mutated infected developed new behaviors. From what the military observed, the ratio of hunter types, compared to other mutated infected, was way higher. Their kind was also commonly found in concentrated areas. Since many of them with the same mutations gathered in a single place, they began forming groups, hunting together. They were extremely catastrophic against smaller survivor groups since these mutated infected hunt in packs. Predator types were the hardest ones to deal with among the common mutation types of infected. Their number was not that great compared to most mutated infected, however, they were the most intelligent in hunting prey. They tend to stray away from their horde, hiding around and ambushing their unsuspecting victims. There were even instances of these mutated infected circling around defense lines and attacking from the back. What made it worse was that many of them could climb trees and other surfaces, making their ambushes even harder to detect. Mixed types were a bit rarer. They were infected, which underwent at least 2 different types of mutation. The good thing about this was that they were unlike single mutations that strengthened over time. The term, jack of all trades, master of none, applied greatly to this mutation. However, having more types of mutation allowed these mutated infected to have a variety of attacks that was quite harder to predict. Moving towards the rarer types of mutations, there were the leader types and the breeder types. From their types of mutation, it was not hard to explain what kinds of mutations they had. Leaders types lead hordes of infected. They were the smartest kind of infected, able to command the horde at their will. Of course, it was a rare mutation, and not all hordes had their type leading it. However, if the horde was clearly larger than normal hordes, with a lot of mutated infected in it, it was good to expect a leader type leading it. Breeder types were one of the hardest to deal with in a different way than others. These types would not join hordes. They create hordes of their own. They birth what the military now called infected abominations, although these infected abominations might look more or less the same race as their mother. They looked extremely deformed and barely recognizable as the same race. The worst thing was that most breeder types would not roam around. They would stay in one place, birthing her minions one after another until the place overflowed with them. This was what made it harder to kill these breeder types, since their nest was always filled with disgusting creatures. Worse, both leader types and breeder types were always mixed type infected. It meant they always had the characteristics of other mutation types. For breeder types, those secondary mutations could even be inherited by their offspring. And lastly, the only infected class, so far, the behemoth class infected, it was still unknown what the cause was, but although extremely rare, some mutated infected grew into unfathomable sizes. As the word behemoth meant, behemoth class infected were infected of gigantic proportions, having at least 7 meters in height. Although 4 to 6 meter tall, infected was already big on its own. The disparity of strength between the smaller ones and those classed as a behemoth was far wider. The reason the behemoth class infected were classed differently was not just their sheer size but their strength after reaching that size. And now, General Perez, his allies, and the volunteers among the survivors were facing such adversaries. "Dad, will we be fine after this?" First Lieutenant Rafael Perez, General Perez's oldest child, said, watching the situation before them. General Perez and the people inside the meeting area during the discussion of the plan knew that Mark was the one that attracted these infected here. None of them could fathom how Mark would attract the infected, but no one expected this situation. They thought it would just be a small horde, but no. It was 1,000 infected horde with countless mutated infected, and 2 behemoth class infected to boot. What made the people even more perplexed was the fact that this horde existed somewhere near the settlement, and none of them knew about it. After all, this infected horde would not reach the settlement this quickly if they were not nearby. "We will be," General Perez replied to his son. "We have no choice but to be fine." General Perez was right. There was no other way but to survive this. Still, just where did they get these weapons? Raphael said, looking at the boxes of guns, ammunition, and explosives that Mark gave them for this mission. For Mark to have this much arsenal, it would make one think he raided some foreign military base or something. Not to mention that some of the guns were actually not legal in the Philippines. Even so, they could not complain about the things Mark gave them. These weapons were what General Perez and his allies needed since the president had the monopoly of weapons in the settlement. Boom. Rumble. Crash. Different sounds of destruction could be heard from a distance. Now, even with the darkness of the night and the rain, they could see the gigantic looming shadows. "Here they come!" A soldier shouted with fear clear in his face. No one would not feel fear while facing those gigantic creatures that could wipe out a settlement in one go. And the worst of it, the infected still continued to flood towards them with no end in sight. The infected reached melee distance. "Prepare to engage," General Perez shouted. This was their final defense line before the slums. They could not just retreat from here even if they needed to fight the infected in close quarters. But all of a sudden, THOOM, a beam of light illuminated their front as it mowed a line of infected in front of them. All of the infected in the close distance were obliterated to ashes. The beam of light also left a dry line of soil on the ground and water vapor in the air. "Reinforcements are here," a lively, excited voice was heard. It was Karen, leading the members of the White Snake Gang into the front line. Bang! 2 flying, infected, fell with just one bullet. Markran, who arrived with Karen, positioned himself on a high tree and started sniping the enemies. "Is the evacuation finished?" General Perez asked Karen as she arrived. "It's all done, General. We left the rest of our forces outside the shelter just in case." "Good. Thank you for cooperating." General Perez breathed out in relief. "But that beam..." Before General Perez finished his question, he saw Karen pointing at the sky. There, it was not only General Perez. Everyone saw her. It was not hard to see the person flying in the sky since her weapon was still glowing, and its light was reflected on her rainbow-scaled wings. The familiar visage was clear. It was May. "Everyone, be careful. The humanoid behemoth is doing something." Markran's shout took everyone's attention. Like Markran shouted, the humanoid behemoth was behaving strangely. It was bowing down for some reason. Rumble. And everyone was enveloped in horror. Along with the rumbling sound of the ground and tree branches snapping, the humanoid, behemoth-class infected, pulled a gigantic tree from its roots, raising it over its head. "Evade! Quick!" General Perez shouted, ordering everyone to leave their positions. It was clear what the humanoid behemoth was doing. It was going to hurl that gigantic tree towards the front line. "Just stay put." A woman's small voice entered their ears, contradicting the general's order. Even so, many still abandoned their posts immediately after seeing the humanoid behemoth throw the gigantic tree in their direction. "Tisk, cowards," the petite woman, who appeared from nowhere, said before actually running towards the trajectory of the tree. "Watch out!" everyone exclaimed towards the woman. But before the three even reached here, the woman extended her hand forward. Before the woman, a hole in space appeared, swallowing the tree entirely. And before their eyes, a similar hole appeared behind the humanoid behemoth. From that hole, the very same tree shot out, hitting the humanoid behemoth's back, causing it to fall over. General Perez looked at the petite woman before them. He realized who she was. "You're Spera, right?" General Perez remembered one of the members of Mark's group. Although Mark did say that his group would help here, he did not expect this at all. "It's a bit late because of the infected appearing from the waters of Manila Bay," But we came to help as planned, Spera spoke to the general. We'll deal with the enemies to the side and the giants. Go deal with everything else. Because of the tree that the humanoid behemoth tried to hurl, the defense on the front line stagnated. The soldiers still had to return to their posts after they tried to run away from the tree, but the infected continuously attacked and were now closing in. At this time, several figures charged towards the infected. What most people here in the front line did not expect was that 3 of the figures were actually children. Not to mention a giant rabbit, a cat-like dog, and a maid. One soldier muttered after seeing a teenaged girl wearing a European-made clothing charge behind one of the children. The most unexpected of all, these children were actually doing better than adults as they fought dozens of infected. What are you all gawking for? Are you letting children beat you all? Husto, who also arrived, shouted. Although he was only saying it to the members of the White Snake Gang, the soldiers around him received collateral damage. Boom! All of a sudden, another loud sound enveloped the battlefield. And to those that witnessed the scene, their mouths opened agape in shock. They saw the beast, behemoth-class infected, topple to its side. What happened? General Perez shouted to the soldiers on the watchtower since they could see things further from up there. General. A man just threw the beast behemoth to the ground barehanded. Before General could utter another word, Spera spoke to the side. I already said we'll deal with the giants. Just focus on the small ones. General Perez and those around did not know how to react to this sudden development, however, they knew one thing. Everyone, here, we will write history, General Perez roared. Oh, every fighter on the front line followed suit with a roar of their own. Writing history at this moment was not wrong. The forces of the infected they were against right now would require countless sacrifices to win. Worse, destroy their only home left. However, how many casualties did they have so far? None. And yet, they could see themselves winning without a single person dying in front of them. Who would not feel elated to participate in such an event that would go down this settlement's history? With those thoughts, they continued fighting. The morale now had shot through the roof. It felt like they could even fight against the world at this moment whether their enemies were infected or not. Day 203 to 1:25 a.m., Presidential Mansion, Central Area, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. After finishing his battle against the elite Special Forces soldiers, Mark made his way towards the presidential mansion. The distance was not that far, and along the way, Mark could detect hundreds of soldiers, both hidden and not. However, unlike when this commotion began, the regular soldiers did not have any notion to tangle with Mark. All of these poor soldiers saw how Mark overpowered this country's strongest elite soldiers. Those elite soldiers could defeat regular soldiers even with a numerical disadvantage, not to mention some of them having superhuman abilities. There was no way these regular soldiers would win against Mark even if they all tried. They all knew that it was a fruitless endeavor even if they tried to do so. And the most important thing was that these soldiers did not receive any order to fight Mark anymore. The higher UPS had gone silent all of a sudden. That was the reason why when Mark passed through, all these soldiers could do was watch. Unlike the police that was given the privilege to move more freely, the soldiers were more or less trained to only follow orders from their superiors. Planning and following it was crucial on battlefields, after all. A single mishap because a single soldier strayed away from the orders could cause the whole plan to collapse. And now that the line of command was frozen, none of them had the intention to move. However, the frozen line of command was not the greatest factor in the actions of these soldiers. Comparing the side of the current government and the camp of General Perez, these soldiers would rather choose the latter. They had no positive outlook towards people who only treated them as cannon fodder and tools at their disposal. Unfortunately, they were soldiers. They could only follow orders from those superior to them in military positions and keep their current status. After all, soldiers had higher stature than refugees in any way in the current situation. And from today onwards, the status of the current government and General Perez's camp would be reversed. These soldiers would rather not incur the ire of the new ruling by provoking Mark. Soon, Mark arrived at the presidential mansion without any resistance on the way. Mark stared at the mansion from outside its doors. The shore fled fast. Mark murmured. When Mark infiltrated the mansion earlier, Mark detected many individuals in a particular room of the presidential mansion. It included a few individuals he was rather familiar with. He was quite sure that it would be the center of command of the current government, led by President Darioa. Now, however, there were only 4 people left in that very same room. Nonetheless, 2 of those 4 people were emitting a very different aura than those of humans. And those 2 were also the 2 most powerful presences he detected in this settlement. Mark looked at the central window of the mansion on the 2nd floor. Although the window was tinted, preventing anyone from outside from seeing through it, he was sure that someone was standing there watching him. Without further ado, Mark entered the mansion and rushed towards that room. And as Mark arrived in front of that room, the door was opened by someone else. Knowing that he was being invited inside, Mark stepped in. It's quite surprising. You did not even hesitate to enter. It was as if you knew that we did not prepare any trap. A voice of an old man entered Mark's ears. Mark glanced around the room. It was a room with only one desk with the central window of the mansion behind it. On that window, a middle-aged man stood, with his back facing Mark. Aside from that man in front of the window, there was an old gentleman wearing formal clothes at the northeast corner of the room. To the west side, 2 people stood, staring at Mark. The second one, wearing hooded clothing, seemed to be behaving like an attendant as he stood behind another middle-aged man. That voice that entered Mark's ear was from the old gentleman at the corner of the room, looking at Mark with great interest. "It is our loss, isn't it?" The man by the window, President Darioa, turned around and faced Mark. His face was filled with resignation to the unfavorable outcome of this event. And to add salt to injury, Mark spoke. "I could have helped this settlement, turning you into a mutator, which you seem to want for a proper price. I did the same with General Perez in Bay City. Why do you have to antagonize us? Putting me into a wanted list and stuff?" President Darioa stared at Mark in surprise. He did not really expect Mark to say this. However, Mark did not seem to be lying. And thus, the president, who seemed to become older, could only sigh. Mark was not lying. He had a bunch of physical crystals lying around unused. Most of these had abilities that were rather undesirable for Mark to use on his people, like mutations that give humans permanent animal parts and stuff. Well, it was just Mark's preference and him having a hoarder mentality to collect stuff. In the current time, no one would bother having those parts as long as it allowed them to survive. It was the same for the president and his allies. They only wanted to become mutators and evolvers. However, their decisions overstepped their bounds. If it was in exchange for a suitable price, Mark could let go of one or a couple of those crystals. And with that sigh, Mark continued, "Greed, isn't it?" President Darioa let out another sigh. "I guess we really are blinded by greed. Fear of dying from the infected, having our position jeopardized, and the stress to keep this place running. We didn't think things properly and lost miserably." Then, the president looked at Mark. "I sacrificed a lot of things to get into this position, whether it be monetary wealth or other important things. Don't you think I would be able to let go of this position easily?" "No, we wanted to use your power to solidify our position even during the apocalypse. Who would not think so? Especially when there is some general who could jeopardize it. You could have done the same as him, you know that, right?" Mark asked. "It seemed that you didn't know." President Darioa shook his head. "Perez is a natural-born leader, adored by the people. Even without his personality, he is someone naturally loved by those around him. And his personal ideals, putting others' lives before his, multiplied that natural talent. It is not something that most of us politicians have. Why do you think that we had to spend millions on propaganda and empty promises to just get the people to put us into this position?" President Darioa took a deep breath. "But it all doesn't matter now. It's our loss. I'll have to vacate this position. Isn't it late for that? You should have vacated it before all of this. Mark tilted his head with a frown. Now that you ordered people to attack me and kidnap important people to me, you should know that I'm here to kill you and all those in cahoots with you. I know. President Daroa nodded before turning to the old gentleman standing in the corner of the room. My apologies, but I would rather have you refrain from killing the Sir, Daroa. The old gentleman said as he stepped forward. And who are you anyway? Mark asked with a frown. It already became a policy for Mark to kill whoever attacked him first. The elite soldiers were just lucky since they were ordered by someone else. Furthermore, their strength was needed by this settlement. As for the president and his allies, who were the mastermind, there was no point in keeping them alive. The settlement should be able to function with or without them. Oh, where are my manners? The old gentleman said carefreely. I am Subsinctus. Most people call me the Shifter, or just Shifter. Hearing the name, along with this old man's powerful presence, Mark understood who this guy was. A Latin name. An agent of the CNC, correct? Mark voiced out. The four people in the room were surprised. None of them expected Mark to know of this underworld business organization, not to mention pointing out the old gentleman as one. Well, this is an unexpected development. The old gentleman, Subsinctus, gazed at Mark in surprise. Are you someone with a hidden background to know of us? This was the right question. All over the world, only those with a high position, power, wealth, or fame knew of the Crystallis Notitia Cetus. Even among the other smaller underworld organizations, only a few knew of the CNC. Yet Mark here knew of them. I'm just a regular person, no, a demon, now, Mark replied truthfully. There was no harm revealing this much, but I just happen to have my own contracted agent. Mark took out the feather that Val Flora gave him to show proof, and here, even the calm-looking Subsinctus looked like he swallowed a bug. Now, this is awkward, Subsinctus said. We planned of proposing a contract with you in exchange for keeping Sir Daroa's life. But since you are in contract with someone else, this card we had in our hands had been rendered useless. This made Mark confused. A contract with the CNC was very valuable. Even more valuable than a person's life. Yet, Subsinctus wanted to give Mark a contract for the president's life. If you are confused, allow me to explain, Subsinctus spoke. Each country around the world had an agent assigned to them. Here, I am the agent of the CNC in charge of this country. However, the only person that could give the agent's requests and transactions are the leaders of the country. In this country's case, the president. That contract could only be renewed after every presidential election, approximately every 6 years. Subsinctus turned to President Daroa. Currently, Sir Daroa is my contractee. That will last until the next 4 years, whether he is dead or alive. Business-wise, that will be unfavorable to me in this country as the transaction will be frozen. You should know that in business, such a thing is very detrimental. More importantly, the one supplying materials to this settlement is me, and the only person that could procure the materials by request is Sir Daroa. Can't I just ask my agent to do that? Mark asked. Subsinctus turned to Mark. While I have no idea who is your agent, but I believe that they would not be able to provide things at the scale of a country's agent. As agents had our designations and specialties within the organization if your agent did not explain it to you. Furthermore, establishing another route to transport materials is not easy as you were thinking, especially now. Mark could only fall onto a pondering silence, looking at President Daroa. Then, you are saying that he will become the bridge between General Perez and you as long as I leave him alive? It is not like we have any other choice in the matter, Subsinctus replied. Even if he already lost and would be stepping down, he is still my current contractor. Our organization's contracts are absolute. Mark frowned. It looked like that this old gentleman was keen on protecting President Daroa because of the contract. It would also be a bad thing for the settlement if the supplies were cut off because of this. What a blunder, Mark murmured as he turned to President Daroa. So, he's the only one needed to live, correct? Then, I'm free to kill the others. Everyone in the room could feel Mark's bloodlust. You better keep your word. Now, step down and become a nobody, Mark said to President Daroa flatly. From now on, this settlement is led by General Perez. Be sure to support him fully. You're only keeping your neck because of this. And here, Mark turned around and left the room immediately. Wait. The other middle-aged man tried to catch up to Mark as he went out. However, he saw nothing but an empty hallway outside. I've been ignored. The middle-aged man, Chairman Pedro Cacahuyan, clicked his tongue. Looks like he didn't see you even as an ant. The hooded man, Crowell, jeered at his contractor. Looking annoyed at Crowell, the chairman re-entered the room. It's good that I refrained from jumping into the bandwagon, am I right, Mr. President? The chairman spoke to President Daroa. No, it should be Mr. Ex-President now. Roderick Daroa slumped into his chair. Stop it. I'm not even in the mood to argue with you anymore. I did my best to send away the Marcoses and succeeded there. In the end, I still lost. Just now, I'm already ready to give up on living. Luckily, he decided to let me live. You people overdid it, the chairman said. By the looks of it, it would have been fine for a while. But you and those greedy F***CKS just had to kidnap people. You all are at fault for your loss. And here, blood spilled all over the safe zone. Those allies of ex-President Darrow that fled were all found dead afterward. Among those who plotted the kidnapping, only 2 managed to survive. Day 203 to 1:42 a.m. Defense line, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. The defense against the infected had yet to settle down even after more than half an hour since it started. However, the situation had stabilized and became under control. It was not only the arrival of Mark's group that led to the current situation. The Chief of Staff, Major General Bautista, abandoned the president's camp and led his loyal subordinates to aid the defense line. Still, no one could deny that the members of Mark's group were crucial to this defense. Many people who saw their prowess as they fought the infected could not believe what they were seeing. Even the Chief of Staff had the same notion towards the members of Mark's group. Furthermore, many people here, soldiers or not, did not come from Bay City. None of them knew who the little girls or the rainbow-winged woman in the sky were. Most of them thought these strong people were hidden among General Perez's people. It was bolstered by the fact that the young woman who knocked down the humanoid, behemoth-class infected, with the throne tree was talking to General Perez. What shocked the people the most was, of course, the man who knocked down the beast, behemoth-class infected, just with his brute strength. Since that very same man jumped into the middle of the horde to attack the gigantic, infected, he was swarmed immediately. However, to make the witnesses even more slack-jawed, the attacks of the infected could not even leave a scratch on his chiseled body. It did not matter whether it was a bite, scratch, or even acidic bile. The man was uninjured as he began attacking the downed behemoth. With all these combined forces, both behemoth-class infected were killed without a single casualty among the people. Even the horde showed signs of thinning out. Reports of infected marine creatures also occurred, with these kinds of infected surfacing from the waters of Manila Bay. However, their numbers were far fewer than the horde coming from the north. These infected were dealt with by Mark's group and the members of the other gangs. After another half hour, the horde of infected was now nothing but a mountain of corpses. This would be quite a hassle to clean up since it was literally blocking the way to the mainland. However, this mountain of corpses was also a trove of opportunities. The people of Corregidor Military Settlement would refrain from butchering any human infected. However, the claws and other mutated parts of the mutated infected could still be used for many things, such as weapons and traps. As for the infected animals, their bodies were filled with materials that people could recycle. In this mountain of corpses, a third was composed of mutated infected animals. Since the horde was composed of more than 1,000 infected, the number of animal corpses would be plentiful. Of course, it was a pity since the meat of infected animals, could not be consumed without repercussions. But it was no problem to use their body parts for armors and weapons. Some leather from infected animals was even harder compared to cheap bulletproof glass. Just how much could they harvest from this heap of corpses? Another opportunity here was that the smell of blood would definitely attract evolved animals into the vicinity. Hunting was one of the sources of food in this settlement. However, it was not easy since all the non-infected animals they could encounter nowadays had already evolved. It was hard to catch non-hostile animals while it was deadly to encounter hostile ones. But if the animals were attracted to the smell of blood, they could just lay traps and ambush the animals. The supposedly catastrophic event ended safely and turned into an opportunity. And more than anything else, the reign of the tyrants of the government has ended. At the closing of this event, no one would object that General Perez was more suitable as a leader compared to those greedy politicians. After the battle against the Horde concluded, General Perez wanted to see through the cleanup operations. Even with the supposed benefits, they could not just leave the corpses of the infected very near the slums. Although it would take a while to remove those corpses, they could at least separate the human corpses from the animal corpses that they could butcher. The human corpses would be thrown into a pit and burned to ashes before getting buried. This way, they could at least remove the possibility of something strange happening, like the dead bodies mutating or some magically reviving from the dead. After all, the current Earth was not the non-magical one they knew in the past. General Perez wanted to oversee these things. However, his loyal subordinates disagreed. Some of them were privy to the plans that were unveiled tonight. Thus, they told the general to go home immediately. And with his son, Lieutenant Rafael Perez, General Miguel Perez returned home. Dad, brother. As the two soldiers entered the door, they were welcomed by a warm embrace of Angeline. Even though Angeline was behaving like usual, she was definitely afraid when they were kidnapped. Even though she was already safe, she was still uneasy inside. This embrace was not only to assure her family but also herself. They didn't do anything to you, right? General Perez asked his daughter. I'm all right. Angeline replied with a smile. Inside the room, every member of the Perez family was present to celebrate Angeline, Elsa, and Paula's safety. Of course, Paula's mother, Pauline, was also present. She was alongside a few more important people. Is everything fine? Angelis asked her husband. We heard the horde was rather large, with 2 behemoths. It should have been disastrous. General Perez smiled, but it's thanks to our friend there. General Perez turned to Mark, who sat at the corner of the room with Elsa. All of the things that happened were Mark's idea. The release of magical energy to attract the infected, spreading the rumors of the kidnapping among the people. Even the fact that he refrained from participating in the battle against the Horde was an idea of his. In fact, upon returning, Mark could have joined the defense together with Paula, Elsa, and Angeline. They were mutators, after all. However, Mark forbid them from doing so. Having them join the battle would implicate things a bit. After all, they were supposed to be kidnapped. The propaganda that Mark planned first would have less effect if they suddenly appeared in the front lines. And the reason why Mark did not participate was that he was still a wanted man. Although he could wear a mask, there were already people who knew that he was here. It could spread in one way or another. Most importantly, could implicate the image of General Perez they succeeded in crafting tonight. After all, the current government was not the only enemy of General Perez in this settlement. And even if some were not his direct enemies, there were those who were vying for the position of this settlement's leader. It was better to prevent things that could possibly be used against the general that was now going to become its leader. In the least, since Mark did not appear in the front line, most people that would only hear rumors about him would think it was nothing but a hoax. Besides, his interference was not needed. His group handled the horde just fine. What happened to your side? General Perez asked Mark. Don't worry, I didn't kill any soldier or members of the special forces. One of them might be lying on the hospital bed for quite a while, though. Mark replied nonchalantly. As for the remnants of the self-proclaimed government and their allies, all are dead but two. Two? General Perez asked. Although he was not really fond of Mark killing them all, he was still surprised that Mark left two alive. There's more merit in leaving that Roderick alive. He'll be stepping down and will give the position to you. Have him by your side and keep an eye on him. Mark then explained the situation, which made everyone in the room rather surprised. By the looks of it, it seemed none of them knew about the contract between the countries and the CNC. If this was true, then Mark was right in keeping the president alive. As for the other one, Mark shrugged. He's crap, but he's still Mayor's father. I let him keep his life, but I made sure that he won't be a nuisance anymore. That was right. One of the allies of President Deiroa was actually the head of Shao Industries and May's father. Even if he was an enemy, it would leave a bad taste in his mouth to kill one of his wife's parents. The best he could do was to implant blood metal into the man's legs, causing him to become permanently disabled. This way, there was little to no chance that he would cause more trouble. In the first place, they were now labeled as traitors as someone who also came from Bay City. No one would lend them a hand anymore. Where is the rest of your group? Raphael asked Mark. We should at least thank them for the help. But immediately after the fighting ended, they all left. And to that request, Mark shook his head. There's no need to, Mark replied. We already overstayed. Unlike you guys who only needed to worry about surviving, we still had things to do. What do you mean? General Perez asked, noticing the hidden message in Mark's words. Mark looked around. He was unsure about the others, but it was fine to let General Perez know. Noticing Mark's eyes, Paula spoke. Should we all leave? There's no need to, Mark replied. General, just get closer. General Perez approached Mark. Then, Mark let out a crystal, causing the wind around him and the general to stagnate, forming a sound barrier. From here, no one could hear what Mark and General Perez were talking about. However, they could see the general's changing expressions as the talk went on. The talk took about 15 minutes. Afterward, Mark removed the barrier with a gush of wind from the surroundings. At this point, General Perez was already feeling exhausted. Mark turned to the others, specifically, the three kidnapped girls. Well then, I need to get going. We might visit from time to time, so make sure to stay alive. You better take care of May, all right? Angeline voiced out and Paula agreed. Do you really have to tell me that? Mark shrugged as his visage slowly vanished, using optical camouflage and shadow mist movement to leave the room. Before he left, however, he gave the general's wife, Angelis, a vague smile. He's gone, Paula said as she could not sense any of Mark's presence any longer. Dad, are you okay? Angeline asked her father, who slumped at the chair thinking. Instead of replying to his daughter, however, General Perez turned to Pauline. Before General Perez could say anything, Pauline already spoke. I know what you want to ask. It's the usual, isn't it? We can't hear anything, but I can tell you. Whatever he said to you, none of it are lies. Hearing that from the walking lie detector, General Perez could only sigh. He felt a heavy pressure on his back. Dear, what did he tell you? Angelis approached her husband and asked. How should I call it? General Perez replied. I guess, we can call it the truth of the world. Those words from the general made everyone present even more confused. *****. The next day, President Deiroa announced the abdication of his position. Stepping down as the president and the leader of this settlement, he handed the position to the new leader, General Miguel Perez. Many people witnessed it since the speech was done a day after the night a horde attacked. Surely, people were shocked by the outcome, especially when the news about the rest of the members of the president's faction was found dead and the only other survivor was disabled. Nonetheless, the general stepping into position was supported by the majority. The merits he had and his actions so far warranted such support. Of course, not everyone was happy about this outcome. There were still other factions vying for the leading position. Unfortunately, General Perez had beaten them by a landslide. In the least, they would not do anything troublesome for a while. The president's abdication aside, everyone waited for the general's speech. However, no one expected that his speech consisted of unbelievable facts about the current state of Earth. Volume End Day 204 to 8:21 a.m. Molino 3, City of Bacoor, Province of Cavite. Flying over the sky of Bacoor, Cavite, it was the floating vessel, the Minicube. On the platform outside the door of the floating vessel, Mark sat down with May and the little girls, looking down at the scenery. Even Amihan was with them, sitting on Mark's head. Of everyone in Mark's group present in this vessel, it was only May and Abigail that had seen this place before. Below them was the land where Mark grew up. Although Mark was not born in this place, he lived in Bacoor since he was 5. Mark witnessed how this place turned from a developing municipal area into a thriving city. Well, not thoroughly. Under his parents' watch, the places he could go were very limited in the past. In the least, he saw many crucial changes during the development of this place. It was not like Mark was being sentimental or anything to pass by this place. However, he was indeed curious as to what changes happened to his hometown after the fusion of dimensions. Besides, their next destination was south towards the Visayas. Going on a slight detour southeast would not hurt. And to say, Mark was kind of disappointed. Mark wanted to see the current state of his hometown and compare it to the past. However, how could he do so when he could not tell where was what exactly? The land changed too much. Places shifted, new mountains and hills appeared, forests covered most of the land, and all that was left of the past civilization were ruins. Even if Mark had perfect memory due to being able to access his subconscious, it was useless. Finding an exact place now was extremely hard unless one was able to see a rather recognizable landmark. However, what landmark could they find after an earthquake surpassing magnitude 10? All that was left from structures, even from the sturdiest buildings, were nothing but destroyed walls. All that Mark could find was the general direction of Bacoor using Bay City as a landmark, but it was still not enough to pinpoint exact locations. Too much had changed that this place did not feel like Mark's hometown any longer. As the people said in the past, it is what it is. There was nothing else that could be done. All that was left was to accept it. Without anything else to do, Mark and the girls just went sightseeing. The infected and Mechids aside, there were a lot of things to see from the sky. There were beautiful ones, ugly ones, but the most interesting things were those that came from the spirit dimension. Trees with crystal-like leaves, multicolored glittering birds, and snakes with wings were just a few among the good examples. Even though Mark did not manage to see what he was looking for below, it was not bad to just look around and appreciate the view. While sightseeing, however, "And what do you want now?" Mark spoke, glancing at the roof of the Minicube. Of course, everyone's attention was turned to who Mark was talking to. Sitting on the ledge was one of the eyes, the Eye of Interest, 19th. No one noticed when she appeared. She even looked like she was joining Mark and the girls while sightseeing. It had been a while since the eyes appeared before Mark. It should be more than a month already. The last time was when Fourth showed up in her adult form during the arrival of the second wave. Since then, the eyes did not make any appearance. For 19th to appear here right now, something important might have happened. It was not only Mark that noticed her, though. "Is everything all right?" From the door of the Minicube, Chimetris appeared. He immediately stared at 19th the moment he stepped out. It was clear that he was ready to fight. After all, the aura emitted by the eyes was similar to those of a god's. However, to Chimetris's readiness to fight, Mark replied, "It's fine." "That one is an eye." Chimetris stared at the woman sitting on the ledge. She indeed had the features that only the eyes had. Mark already mentioned to them before that the eyes were their allies. However, as a weapon created to antagonize gods, Chimetris was uncomfortable around one. It was even if they were not hostile. "You don't have to worry. We're on the same side. I'll give my and my master's word for it." Finally, after staring back at Chimetris, 19th spoke. You are someone created to fight godly beings. But as someone born in this world and created by its citizen, please direct that hostility to foreign gods trying to invade this world. For you to say that, it seems the issue about foreign gods and stuff aren't over yet. Mark chimed in. It is something that will never be over. 19th replied to Mark's words. Not all gods can make a world of their own. However, many of those gods needed a world to rule. The only way for them is to invade another god's creation. And something like Earth that is not directly managed by its creator is a nice target for them. Even now, we have yet to find and oust all the hidden gods. 19th continued. I'm afraid they might start moving soon. That is why we are rather busy. Then, 19th stared at Mark. So, please, as someone not bound by destiny, don't create too many ripples. Those words became a source of confusion for Mark and everyone present. What do you mean? Mark asked. 19th sighed. Are you really doing it without knowing? This is already the second time in 1 month. As it is something that could not be helped, we don't really mind you changing people's destinies. However, to change the destiny of several thousand people at once, there was no way it would not have drastic effects. At this point, it dawned unto Mark what 19th meant. Due to the circumstances in Corregidor military settlement, Mark decided to take the settlement's matters into his own hands. In order to make sure that his friends and allies would live a better life there, he made the president step down before Mark killed his allies. Lastly, he put General Perez as the new leader of the settlement and was likely to be considered as the acting president of this country. However, Mark was someone not bound by destiny. By doing all those things, he affected and changed the destinies of everyone involved. Then, it meant that Mark's actions on a greater scale were affecting the destinies of people and drastically changing their futures. But then, something entered Mark's mind. But why only now? Mark asked. I did the same when Ouroboros tried to take Bay City under their control. It's not only me who got involved but also Mayor. You and Fourth did not say anything about that. Because back then, it is different. 19th answered. You have yet to notice since it is still minuscule. But you're already gaining a very little amount of existential energy. This made Mark even more confused. This was the first time he heard about this so-called existential energy. Was it a type of magical energy, like mana, ether, and miasma? Existential energy. You say? Chimethris spoke, seemingly surprised. Isn't that the source of the powers of gods? Except for 19th, everyone abruptly turned to Chimethris. What he said was a bomb. Definitely a bomb. And to supplement the words from Chimethris, 19th explained. Existential energy is something that defines the strength of someone's existence. Most gods needed this energy to maintain their strength. Wait, Mark interjected. Don't gods gain more energy through people's worship? Here, 19th smiled. Seems like you got the gist of it. Oi, don't joke around like that. Mark frowned. Since when did I present myself as a figure of worship? The other eyes might, but I am someone who doesn't find jokes as something interesting. At this point, Mark was racking his brain. When? Where? How? Who? Mark was really confused. He had never been confused like this even when his empath abilities had yet to bloom. It looks like that it would be a good punishment for you. 19th nodded. I would not divulge any other information about this to you. So, make sure to contemplate. After saying those words, 19th stood up. It looked like she only appeared to tell Mark that message and warn him about his actions. You're just leaving without explaining further? Seriously? You're just here to give me a warning? Mark hurriedly spoke. I am done with my work here. Why can't I leave? Besides, it is not really a warning but more of telling you the effects of your actions. We also have other things to do, but the ripples you are creating made it a bit harder for us to do our work. 19th sighed once again. Think of Earth as a pail of stagnant water. In order to find the other gods who are also not bound by fate, we had to find the minuscule ripples they might create. But then, a large ripple just appeared, drowning all the other ripples. and that ripple is you. 19th continued further. The hidden gods were trying hard to hide their ripples. Obviously, your ripple will stand out and drown theirs. I believe you understand how important for us to find those stragglers from other worlds. We do not mind you creating ripples from time to time, but refrain from creating really big ones. Knowing that 19th had no intention to tell Mark about him getting worshippers and changing the topic, Mark gave up. Instead, "Why are you the one here anyway?" Mark asked. "Isn't Fourth the one in charge of me? Since you can't get the answer from me, are you thinking of getting it from Fourth?" 19th stared at Mark mischievously. "You don't have to worry. Fourth won't appear in front of you a long while. You are doing great, but her other candidate isn't. Thus, she is there to guide her other candidate. And in any case, Fourth did not have even a single idea about your current state, so you will not get any answer from her." Mark was getting annoyed. As someone that did not really want too much attention, knowing that he was a center of worship somewhere felt really uncomfortable. By the way, something entered Mark's mind. Our next plan is to deal with Sinogo. Won't that create the ripples you were talking about? You have no need to worry about that one. 19th replied. Since it is something that we already knew beforehand, we could prepare things on our side. It is just the things you had done so far are too abrupt for use to do anything. By the looks of it, things would be fine as long as the eyes were informed beforehand. However, how would that be possible every time? The eyes would only appear whenever they could, after all. Well then, I should depart, 19th said, until next time. And there, 19th stepped backward with a door of light opening behind her. They really just come and go. Emihan, who hid behind Mark the moment she saw 19th, spoke. Well, I just got informed of something annoying. Mark was not glad, however. It seems I don't have to congratulate you if you are that annoyed. Chemetris, who stood by the door, said to Mark, Don't. Just don't. Mark was getting a headache. Gurgur, isn't it good? May said. If you are getting that existential energy, doesn't it mean you'll get even more powerful? Mark turned to May. She was right. However, Mark really felt uncomfortable knowing this. And if 19th really wanted to punish Mark for making their work harder, she did succeed horribly. Ha! Mark let out an empty sigh. He wondered how this situation would end up. Then, Mark scratched his head as he forgot to ask something. 19th said that what he did in Corregidor was the second one. Then, when was the first? Day 204 to 11:02 a.m. AA. Inside the white space that looked over Earth, the observer watched the changes it went through. And sadly, every day that passed by, the number of humans dwindled even more. Contrary to the grim expectations of the observer, however, many places on Earth began to gain stability. Many smaller settlements joined together to build a place they could call home. They began to develop defenses, equipment, and even food that did not exist back before the apocalypse started. Humans were adapting and at quite a fast pace. It was a good thing for humankind. Unknown to these people, it was not the sole work of humanity. At some of the most successful settlements in different countries, the eyes manipulated things behind the scenes. Sometimes, the leaders of the settlements would gain insights on how to defend their homes. There were also times that people eerily felt danger before it came. There were even times where a scout would get lost and return, carrying information about a source of food and water they stumbled upon, accidentally, while lost. With the help of the eyes, many places gained the safety and stability they needed. Did these actions of the eyes create ripples in the river of fate? Yes. However, it was within the control and a certain expected outcome. If it was the flow of destiny that one was to talk about, it was the appearance of Mutagen that changed the fate of the world and all the lives inside it. By affecting the lives of the people a little bit, the observer and the eyes were only returning bits of their destiny to them. In the first place, many people who died when the apocalypse started were not supposed to in the original timeline. Many of them would live longer lives, and some even die of old ages after a few more decades. But the lives of those people ended drastically as Mutagen arrived on Earth. The whole book of fate, the Akashic records of Earth changed. The lifespan of humans increased, but their survivability in this world decreased. Everything was all the effect of Mutagen on the world. Next was the arrival of Mechaids. It was supposed to clean Earth of more humans. Its arrival would not only destroy the land but rip open the already unstable barrier between dimensions. This event would not only cause a global disturbance in terrain. It would also return Earth to its state when the foreign gods still roamed its land. To cope with the situation on Earth, the Observer decided to use drastic methods, and it was to gain the help of the foreign gods still hidden on Earth and send them to where they wanted to go. Using the fusion of dimensions as the medium and the power of hidden gods as an energy source, the Observer managed to save most of humankind. However, it also caused some mishaps as a few of the gods tried to interfere during the process. Although the Observer and the Eyes succeeded in their goal, the Eyes became severely weakened. That was why the Observer was making sure to watch the ripples if a hidden god was to create one. They needed to prepare to deal with these gods preemptively if they wanted to succeed. At the current state of the weakened Eyes, they would need everyone to deal with a single weakened god. But at the moment, there was also someone that was busy making large ripples himself. It was not an unwelcomed event. After all, the ripples he created caused the destined deaths of many to be pushed far into the future. However, those ripples made it harder for the servants of the world to do their work. It was not only the Observer and the Eyes, even the Guide had a lot to complain about in this situation. The Guide was preparing to receive the souls of hundreds of people in a few days. It was due to a civil war within the settlement on the island of Corregidor to break out. Many soldiers and volunteers were supposed to lose their lives. Those deaths came alongside the lives of many refugees. It was due to the hordes of infected being drawn by the noise of the battle. Because there were not enough soldiers to fight the hordes of infected and two behemoth-class infected, many more people died. More than half of the settlement got destroyed by the infected. It was abandoned by its survivors afterward. Yet, those supposed hundreds to thousands of deaths were replaced by a few souls marked for the fourth circle of hell. The settlement remained standing strong, and the horde of infected that was supposed to cause its demise turned into a gigantic pile of corpses without taking a single life in return. These kinds of changes sure caused a gigantic ripple in the river of fate, overshadowing any other ripple that may appear. Master, I have returned. While watching the ripples of Earth that started to calm down, the Observer heard the voice of one of her Eyes. Have you given him the message? The Observer asked the Eye of Interest, 19th. Yes, I have. 19th replied, but I doubt this will be the last time. The Observer could only nod. It was to be expected. At this point, the Observer turned her eyes to a particular place in the eastern United States. It was a set of brick buildings with red shingled roofs. Back in the day, it was called the St. Gabriel's Hall. Now, however, it turned into a fortress filled with people. The odd thing about this place compared to other settlements was that it was run by a cult. The cult of the Shadow Demon. The barriers during the fusion of dimensions were determined by the unity of the people it protected. The stronger the bond and unity of the people, the harder the barrier was. For his place to survive with just a few people at the start, the unity of the members of this cult was extremely high. And there was no need to tell who this cult was worshipping. It was no one else but the demon clad in a shadowy mist that saved them from the group of cannibals that inhabited this place in the past. The god they prayed to did not help them. But when they gave up, a demon came, freed them, and gave them weapons to fight back. Although there was a possibility that he was not an actual demon, these victims did not care. It was him who saved them and not some non-existent god. They are not proactively recruiting people to their cult, but it is growing at a steady pace. The Observer said, looking at the people in that fortress. Master, are you looking at that place again? 19th respectfully asked. It is hard not to. The observer, it had been a very long time since a new religion was born on this planet. And this one is worshipping a real potential God. Although it is disappointing that they veered away from worshipping the Creator God. Their pure and unwavering faith is beautiful to look at. 19th fell silent with a smile on her face. Since immemorial, her master, the current observer, observed the world as her duty. She had seen many good, bad, disgusting, ugly, and many other things. However, the current observer loved to watch the pure and unwavering. How long had it been since the last time the observer had such interest to observe something? Sighing, 19th spoke. Master, this is a bad thing, is it not? The existential energy received by the focus of worship varies depending on how the worshippers saw them. If he is being worshipped as a shadow demon, would it not turn him into a demonic god in the future? It is true. The observer agreed. But with the minuscule amount he currently receives, it will take a very long time. If he became worshipped by another group with a different view of him, the effects might offset. We still have a lot of time before we can see what kind of god he might become. Here, the observer turned somewhere else. It was the floating vessel currently flying south of Cavite in the Philippines. Of course, it was Mark and his group. Since Mark and May were not bound by fate any longer, the observer could not observe the two directly. However, it was different for those around them. Right now, using Feng Jiruo, the observer could see all those around this female Chinese cultivator. Among Mark's group, Feng Jiruo was the easiest for the observer to observe. Emihan was a sylph. The little girls were now blood demons. Spera was an inheritor. Chimetris was a chimera, composed of many mythical and demonic creatures, and Elia was an elder succubus. Each of them had either a constitution or power that could obstruct the observer's observation every now and then. It was unlike Feng Jiruo, whose power was cultivated inside herself. She was the most human among Mark's group right at this moment. Using Feng Jiruo as the medium, the observer decided to watch the group a little bit, and to say, it was relaxing to watch them. Unlike most of the people around the world living a tense life, Mark's group was among the few enjoying it. They even had the time to sightsee while eating their lunch. They sure were a bunch of weird but people with a nice atmosphere around them. ******************************* Day 204 to 12:11 p.m. St. Mary Mountain, Barangay Balas, Municipality of Talisay, Province of Batangas. Atop the St. Mary Mountain, north of Tala Lake, Mark's group landed for lunch. It was already past noon, so they decided to eat lunch before they continued on their journey. And since Mark had never really seen Tala Lake before, he chose this location. Well, the scenery was far different from what everyone expected, however. The sky above the Tala Lake was dark and thick, filled with ash and dust. It was as if this place had different weather on its own compared to the rest of the country. As for the reason, Tala Lake was not a lake filled with water any longer. In front of Mark and his group, they were watching a gigantic lake of lava with the barely recognizable tall volcano at its center. What a hellish but amazing scene, Mark murmured, watching the lake while waiting for lunch to be served. Above his shoulder, there was the wind manipulation mental crystal, glowing brightly. At the same time, Emihan was also using her magical abilities to control the wind around them. If Mark and Emihan did not do this, they would have been all covered with dust and ash already along with their food. This place sure was a good location to sightsee. But, of course, if one could protect themselves from the ashes, dust, smoke, and even the smell of rotten eggs. Earth had gotten a very large and painful pimple, isn't it? Spera spoke, looking at the same scenery as Mark. Mark looked at Spera with half-closed eyes. She was right, but there was no need to voice it. What she said just ruined the nice scene. But before Mark could reprimand Spera, she spoke, pointing at something. Wait, what's that? Of course, Mark also turned to where Spera was pointing at. He did not see anything else stranger than the lava lake earlier. If Spera was playing around, he would go smack her head. However, Spera was not playing around. As Mark turned to look, There was indeed something strange. "Is that a lava monster?" Spera voiced out. At the foot of what was left of Tall Volcano, a gigantic creature surfaced from the lava. It looked humanoid, although it was walking on all fours, which made it look like a giant lava gorilla. If not for the proportions of its body, one would think it was. Was it a magical creature, or a mutated infected? It was quite hard to know. Although Mark and Spera could see the creature due to its size and the height of the mountain they stood at, the creature was actually more than 6 kilometers from their location. It was too far for Mark's detection range. In any case, none of them expected to see some creature rise from the lava lake. Should they go check it out after lunch? Day 204 to 1:25 p.m. Tall Lake, Municipality of Talisay, Province of Batangas. After eating a simple lunch, sumptuous considering Earth's current state, Mark's group was ready to go. But before continuing towards their journey south, Mark decided to stop by the gigantic lava monster they saw surface from the lava lake of Tall Lake. Whether that lava monster that appeared was a magical creature or a mutated infected, who would not feel curious what it was? It was not every day that one would see a moving creature with a lava-like exterior. The mini-cube floated high up in the sky while Mark jumped down to look. He did not intend to engage the creature immediately. Mark just flew close enough that it was within his detection area. If it was some sort of magical creature, Mark might leave it alone. After all, magical creatures were not mindless beings. They would not pose much of a threat unless provoked first. It was different if it was a mutated infected, however. And when Mark reached enough distance for him to sense the creature's emotional fluctuations, there was none. It meant that this gigantic lava monster was a mutated infected. These gigantic infected were labeled as behemoth class, from what Mark learned in Corregidor military settlement. A rare kind of infected that mutated into ginormous proportions, enhancing their mutations and abilities far beyond other infected. But as someone with knowledge of Freed and the mutation tiers from the planet Arielis, Mark had a different term for these creatures. These gigantic infected was called a variant level 6 infected in Arielis. What made these giant infected different and called variants was the line of mutation they went through. After reaching level 4 mutation, there was a chance for the mutation to jump off to level 6 mutation, entirely skipping level 5 mutation. The reason was yet to be known, even in Arielis. This, however, would result in the infected growing differently. This would cause the body of the infected to grow larger to contain the mutation that their previous body would not handle. And to say, these variant mutations were rare for a reason. It was because they were extremely dangerous beings. From the growth spurt of these infected, the mutations on their bodies would just grow stronger, and their bodies larger. The mutated eye that destroyed Arielis was actually suspected to be the variant mutation that was left to grow alone. That was why, like what Mark intended to do with Sonogo, Mark decided to deal with this lava infected immediately. Something like this with a lava-like body would pose a great threat, especially to the current Earth. Earth was now mostly covered with forests and grasslands from the spirit dimension. If this lava infected started roaming within those forests, there would only be one expected outcome: an uncontrollable forest fire all over the country. Well, the trees from the spirit dimension seemed to have more resistance to fire than regular trees. There would be no need to worry if the source of the fire was something normal. However, this lava infected could move. It was basically a walking source of forest fires. Although the reason was unknown, it was good that this lava infected had yet to leave its nest. Who knows what disaster it would cause if it left sooner before Mark's group stumbled upon it. With those thoughts in mind, Mark returned to the mini-cube. "How is it?" May asked Mark upon his return. "That thing is a mutated infected," Mark replied. "We should deal with that immediately before it starts to cause trouble." Everyone here, of course, except Abigail and Miracle, understood the threats that such a creature could bring. However, considering that it was a mutated infected, clad in lava, how would they kill it? Bullets would have no effect on a gigantic creature like that. Even explosives probably would not. Looking at the creature, it seemed to be even larger than the ones they encountered the other day. One of their options that could possibly do this time was Chimetris, causing Spera and Feng Jiruo to look at him. After all, this humanoid chimera showed his prowess during the fight the other day by toppling a behemoth class with his bare hands. However, Chimetris was not responding to those gazes. He was pretty confident that Mark understood that he was not that omnipotent. While he had quite a sturdy body, there was no way he would go unscathed touching a bunch of molten rock. In the first place, the creatures used in his creation did not have much resistance towards fire-based enemies. In the first place, Mark was not looking at Chimetris. Instead, Spera noticed Mark staring at her to her surprise. No, wait. Why are you looking at me? Isn't it obvious? Mark tilted his head. You're going to deal with that thing there. Wei-wa? Wait. I know I've been annoying you these past days, but are you really going to make me fight that? I'm going to die, you know? Ouch. Spera panicked until something hit her forehead. She stared at Mark, only to see him looking at her strangely as his right hand was still outstretched after flicking her head. Use your brain, all right? Who said that I'm making you fight that? Mark said. You didn't learn anything from school? Spera stared at Mark. Her eyes looked angry but also helpless. Well, I'm sorry. Spera glared at Mark. I've never gone to school, so how would I know what you have in mind? The atmosphere took a dive. Emihan, Elia, Chimetris, and Miracle aside, everyone here was human, at least in the past. Since school was a mandatory thing even to poor families, it was a common thing to assume that Spera had gone to school. It was coupled with the fact that Spera barely shared her past with anyone here. In the first place, who would be proud to say everything of their past when they were nothing but a helpless slave? In any case, whether he was on the wrong or not, Mark did step on a landmine here. Suddenly, Spera felt someone embracing her. Why are you hugging me? Spera asked May, who embraced her while giving Mark a complaining eye. All right, my bad. Mark took a step back here. There was no way he would resist May's stare. Besides, although there was no one to directly blame here, he was the one who said the wrong things. What I wanted to say is there's no need to fight that thing below. Mark continued. You know your best ability, right? That's what we needed. Finishing up the plan, everyone got ready. Well, it was not much of a plan, really. There was only one thing to do, after all. Below, the lava infected was moving around rather slowly. Although it might just be the exterior, its entire body was covered with hot, boiling, semi-liquid lava. Its body was too heavy and stiff to move around faster than it could right now. Still, speed was the least of this infected's concern. With its body structured like that, there were very few things around that could actually harm it. Not to mention that it was staying at the remains of Tall Volcano at the center of Tall Lake that turned into a giant lava lake. No dangers could come to it at all. Well, none until now. The lava infected was oblivious that it was about to get the largest shower of its life. All of a sudden, a shadow loomed over the lava infected. It could not help but wonder why it suddenly became dark and looked around. Even the dumbest infected would notice such a drastic change, not to mention something that mutated this advanced. And then, the lava infected noticed the rather strong fluctuation of energy. The lava infected could only look up and finally found the reason for the sudden darkness that loomed over him. A gigantic hole opened up in the sky. At first, it was all darkness inside the hole. It was until a torrential burst of water covered the darkness as it began to pour down. Just in that initial burst of water, just how much was there? It was hard to tell. It was as if a metal drum with a mouth as wide as 4 city buses bunched with 2 parked side by side and the other 2 above the first pair had been toppled upside down. It did not take long. The burst of water immediately turned into a pillar of water that fell onto the lava infected. And as dumb as the lava infected was, It stared blankly at the incoming pillar of water. Boom! Finally, the water poured onto the lava infected, causing a large explosion. The heat of the infected's body caused the water to drastically turn into steam, causing a large steam explosion. The explosion on the lava infected's body did not last too long, however, as more water poured onto it. Sizzle. Boom. Boom. Of course, the water would flow down the remains of tall volcano. As the flowing water touched the lava lake, sizzling sounds and more steam explosions ensued. Almost immediately, the large part of the lake of lava was covered in foggy steam. Finally, the hole in the sky closed down, causing the pillar of water to end from overflowing through it. Asterisk asterisk. And that's it, Mark said as they watched the result of their work. They were kilometers from the ground, but they could still feel the searing heat of the steam rising towards the sky. Spera sure was quite surprised with this. If it was just her, she would not think of connecting a portal underwater. Because of that, the water on the other side overflowed, causing that pillar of water that caused the commotion below them. And the target of the portal? It was actually in Manila Bay, since it was the most familiar mass of water to Spera since the world change. What are we going to do next? Spera asked after closing her portal completely. Nothing really, Mark answered. I mean, we need to wait until the steam dispersed. That won't take a short time. That was true. The thick steam that now covered the lava lake would not disperse any sooner. There was no need to mention that even though the portal was already closed, the water that was poured onto the lava infected at the foot of Tall Volcano was still flowing down onto the lava lake. Asterisk 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 day 204 to 4:21 p.m. Tall Lake, Municipality of Talisay, Province of Batangas. A few hours passed by. Finally, the thick steam became thin enough. With this, Mark decided to use the wind manipulation mental crystal, together with Amahan's magic, to blow away the remaining steam. And as the strong wind swept across the lava lake, the result of their doings was unveiled. There at the foot of Tall Volcano, a 15-meter tall stone statue had fallen onto the burnt ground. Its body parts had damage here and there, probably due to the steam explosion, but it was mostly intact. Aside from the remains of the lava infected, a patch of the lava lake surrounding the doused area had its surface solidified. What's next? Chemetris asked Mark, seeing the result. And to say, Mark was scratching his head. I guess I'll go down and see if I can get something from that thing. We didn't get anything from the two behemoth class the other day, after all. Mark was not really sure if he would get anything from this lava infected. After all, one factor that allowed Mark to know if he would be able to get a mutation from an infected was its intelligence. Furthermore, even if they were variant mutations, not all of them had mutagen stones inside their heads similar to other infected. And this lava infected was clearly dumb. Mark was not expecting much from this one. In the first place, their goal in killing this guy was the threat it could pose. Waving through the remaining heat of the lava lake, Mark half-heartedly flew down. Mark observed the lava infected. It was clearly dead. But then, Mark felt something. A familiar aura from the body of the lava infected. Mark could not help but touch it. Unexpectedly, the psi crystal reacted. The new crystal formed in front of Mark's surprised eyes. Yes, a new crystal. A crystal with an orb inside glowing like bellowing flames. Mark finally remembered this familiar aura. Garvlam, Mark murmured in confusion. That guy's spirit body already escaped to Japan. Why did this guy have that flame demon's aura and magical energy? Mark was really surprised and confused. This lava infected actually bore the magical energy and aura of a deity-level flame demon. This was really unexpected and something that was hard to understand. Day 204 to 4:30 p.m. Tall Volcano, Municipality of Talisay, Province of Batangas. Phew. It's too hot here, Elia complained while fanning the front collar of her loose clothes, not minding that in every pull, the deep valley between her ample mounds was being exposed. Just endure a bit, Mark said with a shrug. I only asked for Chimetras, and you insisted on coming yourself. You wanted to ask about a sealed ancient demon, right? Ilya replied. In these cases, it's better that you ask me instead of Master. I agree. Chimetras chimed in. Like how Ilya released my seal, she's more knowledgeable in these kinds of stuff. Right now, Mark, Chimetras, and Ilya stood near the base of the remains of Tal volcano. In front of them were the nearly broken remains of the lava-infected. Knowing that something was strange, Mark told the two what was happening after returning. And such, the three of them came back to check what was happening. After all, anything regarding a deity-level demon could never be considered as just some trivial thing. Not to mention that it was very likely that it was someone that lived through Earth's lost history, the era of gods. It was the reason Mark called these two. Suspecting that Garvlam and the other leaders of Ouroboros were individuals of the same era, they might have found out something. It was rather weird that a random, mutated infected bore the aura of a deity-level demon of the past. Ending the conversation about temperature and expertise, Ilya and Chimetras took a close look at the remains of the lava-infected. Even the two of them seemed pretty surprised at how badly damaged the body of the lava-infected was. All they did, after all, was pour large amounts of water on it. Yet, it was damaged as if it was tossed hundreds of explosives. This sure was the advantage of having knowledge. Both Chimetras and Ilya began to consider learning more things from human knowledge from now on. Those thoughts aside, the two carefully observed the corpse, and although it was very faint, they both agreed that it had a powerful aura of a demon. However, the aura was beginning to disperse, likely because Mark had already gathered its essence into a crystal. After confirming that what Mark said was true, Ilya began observing the surroundings. It was rather unusual for the unserious, elder succubus to show such concentration. Maybe that? Ilya murmured while Mark and Chimetras watched in silence. You realized something? Mark asked. I can't really say for sure, but I have a suspicion, Ilya stated. You said that the flame demon, with the same aura this body had, was summoned using a ritual by sacrificing people, right? That's what we know so far, Mark replied. I already told you two earlier. After Mark fought the forces of Ouroboros and Garvlam in Bay City, the remains of the sacrificed people were found. They were buried among the rubble of the warehouse the ritual occurred, charred to a crisp, and none of the bodies could be recognized. That was a dark time for the survivors of Bay City. Although General Perez did not show it to Mark, he was really dismayed that the Ouroboros were doing horrendous stuff under their noses. What the military knew about the ritual and other things was fairly limited. After all, no member of Ouroboros was caught since none of them were humans, to begin with. The only humans within the ranks of the Ouroboros at that encounter were Spera and Shin, who rescued Garvlam. However, as Spera was nothing but a last-minute transporter, she knew almost nothing about that situation. As for Mark, he knew more than the military. He managed to capture the cursed sword, Flam, who was now named Ignis under Mark's ownership. Although Ignis was not privy about the specific stuff like the structure of the ritual, he knew the general situation. It was from Ignis that Mark knew more than the military. The members of Ouroboros summoned Garvlam, who was sealed somewhere, using the sacrificial ritual. Since they did not manage to find the exact location of where Garvlam was sealed, they used a revised ritual to summon him instead of breaking the actual seal. From the things you said, I believe we already arrived at the same conclusion. Ilya said. Mark also had his own suspicion, and that was Garvlam might have been sealed in this place, Mark said, looking at the dead, lava-infected. And to Mark's words, Ilya nodded. However, we can only assume, Ilya spoke after the agreeing nod towards Mark. Aside from the lingering aura on this lava monster, there's no other evidence left. Still, Ouroboros failed to find the exact place when it is this obvious? Mark wondered while looking around. Well, there are different kinds of seals used to imprison powerful beings, Ilya said, tapping her chin. In this case, the seal might have been hidden carefully, not to mention This place is a natural sealing array itself. Natural things were the hardest to see. It was a good phrase that could apply to many things. In this case, a natural array. It was a kind of magical array that was hard to detect, as if perfectly blended with nature. If the cover of Garvlam's seal was this natural array, it would be no wonder that the Ouroboros was unable to find it. A natural array could only be easily seen by powerful beings, like deities. However, during the modern times, these powerful beings could not just go around without the eyes detecting them. Unfortunately, the weaker people of Ouroboros had no way of finding it. Mark looked around. An island within a lake on an island within a lake on an island. This phrase was one of the known descriptions of the tall volcano and its surroundings. If one was to think about it, it was as if it was several layers of terrain on top of one another. However, no one would ever think that there was something hidden beneath this volcano. Even I had no ability to see a natural array. Even Master could not. Ilya shrugged while glancing at Shemetris. We can only assume that it was the case, though from what it looks like, the array is already destroyed. The terrain around Tall Lake had been drastically changed. With it now being a lava lake, it was a very concrete sign that its natural array had already been destroyed. And due to the fact that it was destroyed, this lava-infected might have stumbled what remained of Garvlam while he was sealed in this place. Though what confused me is that I managed to get a crystal out of it. Mark said, as it was the most confusing part. After all, to create a mental crystal, or a physical crystal, there were rules for it to work. For a mental crystal to be created, there should be a strong source of magical energy. It could be the spirit of a magical being, a body of a powerful magical creature, or a high-density concentration of energy. And none of these rules was fulfilled when Mark managed to create the mental crystal that contained Garvlam's aura. It would not be surprising if Mark got a physical crystal instead, considering that the source was a mutated infected. However, just as mentioned, he got a mental crystal. I have another assumption, but like before, I have no evidence. Ilya said in response to Mark's confusion, "Just say it." Mark replied, "That Garvlam abandoned his body, right?" Ilya asked, "You even kept his body?" Mark nodded in response. He did have the remains of Garvlam and was still kept back in the base. Being the body of a deity-level demon, it would not decompose. In the first place, it was not a mortal body but something made of energy. A flame demon was an elemental being similar to sylphs, like Emihan. However, Mark had no use for the body of Garvlam so far. The psi crystal would not even react to it either. That was why it was just sealed within a blood metal coffin inside Mark's workshop. That body might be a newly created one. Might even be created during the ritual using the energy from the sacrifices. There are demons that can survive even without a physical body, after all. Ilya continued. As I said before, there are various ways to seal powerful and unkillable beings. One effective way is to separately seal their spirit and their original body. It is to ensure that even if the spirit of the sealed being was released, they won't be able to use their full strength immediately. That might be the case here. And you are saying that this guy luckily stumbled upon Garvlam's original body after the seal broke and ate it? Mark asked with a tilt of his head. Maybe? Who knows? Ilya replied, knocking on the dead, lava-infected, solidified exterior. But you have the evidence in this one. The crystal. No matter how it happened, we can be sure that that flame demon's body was eaten by this guy. And you are lucky to extract that body's essence before it disappeared entirely. Ilya added. That was right. It was just a lucky coincidence. Who would have known that their lunch today would lead to them finding Garvlam's possible sealing prison? But this even led them to learn one important thing. Even if they encountered Garvlam once more in the future, he would surely still be too far from recovering his full strength. This was a good piece of information. We're done here then. Shemetris, who was listening to the conversation of the two, finally chimed in. Well, I guess so. Mark replied. There was nothing left to do here. While they were talking, the remaining aura of Garvlum left inside the dead, lava-infected's body completely dispersed. With the slight detour they had, Mark unexpectedly gained a nice item. It was another crystal he could utilize or give to someone. Unlike physical crystals that could contain mutations originated from mutagen and unusable unless one absorbed the mutation, Mark could use any mental crystal containing magical abilities. The question, however, was what kind of ability it had, and if Mark would actually have a use for it. Thanks to Mark's connection to Ignis, he already had the ability to use magical flames. Black flames at that. Having a crystal that had the ability to control fire would feel really redundant for Mark now. I guess I'll be giving this to someone, Mark murmured. And with those thoughts in mind, their slight detour ended. Unfortunately, it was already late in the day to continue their journey further. Thus, they decided to start searching for a good place to camp. After finding a place to camp, their next goal was to prepare dinner and go to sleep. As they ate, however, Mark's head was full of thoughts. Those thoughts were mainly about the crystals, specifically, mental crystals, he currently had at his disposal. Aside from the ones he was using most of the time, he still had the crystal from the Earth Demon they killed during their clash with the Tamawas that he had yet to try out. Now, he had another crystal that he should at least learn how to use. Should I give this crystal to Miracle? Mark thought at first. Miracle was the only one in his family that did not have a magical ability. But in the end, Mark shook his head. Miracle was too young to hand the responsibility of a magical ability, not to mention something related to fire. With a shrug, Mark changed his thoughts, and for some idiotic reason, Mark tapped Amihan, who was lying down on his head. "Hey, Amihan," Mark said in a low voice. "Want to use this new crystal?" "Hey." Amihan sure was flabbergasted at Mark's question and could not reply. In the first place, she could not tell whether Mark was joking or not. Day 205 to 10:11 a.m. Tayabas Bay, Mimaropa region, southwestern Luzon. Dealing with the lava-infected made them spend a day near Tall Lake. The time they spent, however, was wasted on waiting for the steam to thin out. It was not like it was something to fuss about. Mark got something really valuable out of it. Well, they got more mysteries to think about, though. For the nighttime, they chose a location that was pretty far away from Tall Lake to rest. There was no way they would spend the night near the Tall Lake, where the air was filled with ash and the smell of sulfur and molten rock. Fortunately, the night was uneventful. All of them managed to get a good night's rest. By the looks of it, the area they camped in was devoid of infected, but had quite a number of evolved animals. But since evolved animals were more intelligent despite being highly reliant on their instincts, they stayed away from Mark's group that was composed of frighteningly strong people. And right after they had breakfast the next day, Mark's group immediately set off to continue their journey. Now, the mini-cube was passing over the waters of Tayabas Bay. Since they came from the direction of Tall Lake, they were passing near the island province of Mindoro. And their destination, the highest peak of Panay Island, Mount Madia as. The world really changed, May said, looking at the scenery outside. Mark and May sat on the platform outside the door. They had to do as such since they would encounter some flying infected, or feral evolved animals, along the way. They could just ignore these creatures since they would barely damage the sturdy floating vessel. However, they just had an incident where a group of giant acid-spitting mosquitoes ended up crashing in front of the mini-cube. It caused the windows of the bridge to be covered in acid, blocking most of their view from inside. They had no other choice but to submerge the mini-cube under the water for a bit, wasting more of their time because of the sticky acid. Fortunately, the acid did no damage to the windows at all. It seemed that the magically created vessel had a good defense against such attacks. That was why Mark and May were standing by outside. Since they were capable of flight, they were to intercept any flying threat that would block their way. While on guard duty, however, Mark and May could also do some sightseeing. After all, the new state of Earth had many things to see and discover. If they were walking on the ground, it would not be as impacting. But since they were up high in the sky, they could see the changes further away. The reason May could not help but say those words was because Mark was currently browsing the offline map he installed on his phone. And using the view taken via satellite, the changes became even more apparent. Islands had shapes deformed. Some became larger, while other smaller islands seemed to have been swallowed by the waters. If they had not known, it would not be hard to think that it was a different world. This change brought both benefits and drawbacks. The fusion of dimensions would inevitably happen sooner or later after Mutagen entered Earth. However, the observer decided to use it to counteract the immediate effects of large pieces of space debris entering Earth. If they had not done so, while Earth was already overrun by infected and mechids, it would be a burning wasteland that no human on the surface could survive. Earth turning into a magical forest-covered world was way better than turning into a barren wasteland devoid of life, especially humans. Now that Earth turned into a magical world, it would not be long before more humans began to develop magical and psychic abilities. It was a good thing since they would need it to survive. After all, the infected would definitely undergo similar changes. Yes, aside from infected magical creatures, those human infected would surely have their own magical abilities. It would not be a surprising thought considering the many kinds of infected Mark and his group had encountered so far. Even humans that had ancient bloodlines belonging to those magical beings had mutations that resembled the abilities of their ancestors. Mark, for example, a descendant of a blood demon, having his blood mutated. This did not seem to be a simple coincidence. There was also Emika's family, with both Emika and her younger brother, Mikio, both having abilities related to plants and trees. There was also their father that turned into a Trent infected. It would not be surprising if they had a Dryad in their ancestry since it was hard to determine what catalyst would cause a human, not to mention the rest of their family, to have plant-related abilities. If it happened to them, it could happen to others. The question now was, would those people that awakened magical abilities still behave like humans? Or would they think that they were above others? Societies centered around these magic users would definitely rise, causing more friction to the already crumbled human society. Gerger, May called out to his side. I just noticed, but we haven't encountered any magical races since we left the base. That was true. Since they left to check on their friends in Bay City and arrived at Corregidor Island, Mark's group did not encounter any magical race on the way. Both the mortal dimension and the spirit dimension were already fused. Why was there a lack of magical races in the surroundings? Since the fusion of dimensions, the only group of magical races that Mark encountered was the tribe of half-breeds in Infanta military settlement. That was if Mark was not to include the other guy in hood in the president's office the other day. But in that question, there could only be one answer. They might be hiding. Mark answered May's question. The current Earth is unfamiliar to us, not to mention to them. Unlike humans that could adapt quicker, magical races can't easily do the same. And with the dangers everywhere, the only thing they can do is hide until they get used to the new world. Mark's assumption was not that far from the truth. In fact, not only those that came from the spirit dimension, but those magical that stayed in the mortal dimension, with humans were having a hard time coping with the sudden influx of magical energy in the surroundings. Emihan was the same, although she was doing her best not to show it. Since the fusion of dimensions, it was clear that Emihan was sleeping more than she was since meeting Mark. It seemed that her body was trying to cope with the thicker magical energy by sleeping. Even at this time, when it was almost noon, Emihan was inside the mini-cube, sleeping on her pillow. At Mark's answer, May nodded. It was hard to think of other reasons, and since humans were still surviving this mess, it was impossible for magical races capable of unfathomable skills to just die against the infected and mechids. Then, May changed the topic, remembering what happened yesterday. Gerger, you really plan on giving the new crystal to Emihan? May asked. I can't, Mark asked back. I can't really think of using it since I can already make fire because of Ignis. And besides, only I can control the crystals since I have the psi crystal on me. Although I can give it to you, Abigail, or Iola, you three already had psychic abilities, not to mention it all came from the crystals. You three would have a long downtime where you can't use your psychic abilities after using this crystal, and we can't have that. Not right now. Besides, I'm not giving it to Amihan immediately either. Probably after we dealt with Sonogo. Mark added. And to Mark's question, May shook her head. I'm not saying to not give it to her. Actually, she deserved to have some reward. Amihan had been really helpful to us, but she never really asked for anything aside from fruits and sweet food. And that was what May was worried about. Since Mark met Amihan, the little sylph had done many things to help Mark and the rest of his group. Yet, Amihan never really asked for anything, and she was just happily following Mark around. The most she asked was sweet fruits or desserts whenever they managed to get their hands on one. We're on the same boat then. Mark smiled. Amihan's wind magic is already getting stronger and stronger thanks to the wind attribute crystals I got from the infected sylphs. She's probably stronger than the king of sylphs we saw back in the stone fortress. But Amihan will reach her limit soon as a sylph, her small body could only store that much energy. Then won't giving her the crystal cause her harm and overload her body? May asked with worry. If Amihan's body was reaching its limits, why would Mark intend to give the new crystal to her? You don't have to worry about that. Mark shrugged. You haven't realized it, don't you? These crystals do not only serve as a vessel to these abilities and mutations. It can cause the body of the person absorbing it to adapt to the ability it sealed. That was what the downtime was for, to make both the existing and new abilities coexist. Then, it will make the person's body adapt to the new ability. In Amihan's case, her magical capacity might double with half of it being the new ability within the new crystal. In short, it was a way for Amihan to surpass her limits as far as Mark knew. Sylphs were not extremely strong beings, to begin with. It was not surprising that Amihan was beginning to reach her limits due to Mark's help. Unfortunately, the enemies were getting stronger. There was no way that Mark would let Amihan just stop at her limit. Mark stood up. It's time to work. Mark and May flew to the roof of the minicube. From the west, likely from the island of Mindoro, a group of birds flew towards the minicube. How many is there? Mark asked May, as the only thing he could see from this distance was small dots. May stared at the flock of birds with her eyes dilated, with her vision zooming into the target. About 30, May replied. They're flying too erratically, it's hard to keep count. It's fine. We'll kill them no matter how many they are. Mark said, taking out his own sniper rifle. His sniper rifle was not something modified. It was just a standard HKPSG-1 that he took from the group of raiders in New Jersey. It was something definitely illegal to own in the Philippines, however. The two positioned themselves on the roof of the minicube. Normally, a sniper would be in a prone position when firing for better stability of the gun and accuracy. But of course, Mark and May did not have to do that. With their bodies enhanced far stronger than regular humans would, their bodies were just as stable as the roof they were on. And with Mark and May sniping the incoming horde of infected birds, the horde fell down the waters of the bay without even reaching the mini-cube. Seriously, I need more practice, Mark said with a shrug, glancing at May. His wife beat him in terms of accuracy. She even killed 2 or 3 infected birds with a single bullet several times. Among the 37 infected birds they shot at, Mark only managed to kill 14. But Gerger is already good, though. May looked at Mark. Besides, Gerger is way better at close quarters than me. You will always be in front while I support you at the back. That's true, Mark said with a shrug. But I tend to stupidly min-max stuff in games whenever I can, so I might as well get some practice later on. May looked at Mark with a sigh. Sometimes, Mark was just too childish. The journey continued with a bit of fighting here and there, but with the minicube as their steady transport vessel, They almost reached their destination before sunset. However, setting into the mountain during the night was not viable and they decided to spend a night near its foot. Day 206 to 9:21 a.m. Base of Mount Madia as Central Panay Mountain Range, Panay Island, Philippines. The Panay Island. It was one of many islands in the Philippines rich in ancient Filipino culture, history, and mythology. It was where the tribes that worshipped the ancient Visayan gods originated. Those tribes resisted various terms of foreign occupation and refused to surrender their beliefs and religion. It was unfortunate that despite their loyalty to their faith, they ended up scattering to other places, in the end, burying most of their culture from the current history. Nonetheless, despite most of those tribes leaving their homeland, the landmarks that represented their culture remained. It was like how the second highest peak in the Visayas stood tall, the sleeping volcano, the Mount Madia as. This dormant volcano had its name in various spellings. It was either called Mount Madia as, Mount Maja as, Mount Madhya as, and internationally, Mount Madiak. But aside from being the second highest peak in the entire Visayas, this dormant volcano boasts a rich mythological culture. Mount Madia as was said to be the home of various Visayan gods. Siddhappa, the Visayan god of death, was said to live in Mount Madia as. It was the same for the Visayan god of meteors, Bulalaka, before he chose to dwell in the sky to fulfill his role. The Visayan god of second chances, Pandaki, was also known to frequent the mountain to visit Siddhappa. And even the Visayan supreme goddess, Canlaon, was said to live in Mount Madia as for some time before transferring her abode to another mountain, the mountain now called Mount Canlaon. Lastly, the Visayan supreme sky god, Kaptan, was said to pass by this very mountain every time he left his domain, the Kahilwayan, and go down to earth. And of course, the goal of Mark's group in this mountain, the passage to Kahilwayan. But as it seemed, it was not someplace they could just go. Mark's group arrived near Mount Madia as before sunset yesterday. At that time, they could just go and find a flat area near the peak of the mountain if they wanted to camp. Yet, Mark's group decided to camp at the base of the mountain. And the reason? A sacred ground is a sacred ground, after all. Mark said, staring at the towering mountain before them. Like Mount Banahaw, which was rumored to be a sacred mountain, Mount Madia as was the same. If Mark's group just went straight up the mountain, they would end up finding nothing unnatural. It would be a mountain, a dormant volcano, and that would be it. Nothing else. But looking from below, Mark felt the same feeling when he brought May to Mount Banahaw. There was a secret domain in this place that not just anyone could enter. Looks like there is a barrier, Elias said, looking at the same scenery as Mark. Are we going to force it open? Forcing it open would be easy for you, Shemetris said to Mark, agreeing with Elias' suggestion. In front of them was an invisible barrier. By the way, the invisible barrier encompassed the entire mountain from base to peak. However, it was not there to stop anyone from entering the mountain. Anyone could enter the mountain while passing through it. However, it would only lead to the physical mountain and not the hidden realm inside. Forcing the barrier open was definitely easy for Mark. With a wave of his hand and a surge of miasma, he could create an irreparable hole through the invisible barrier. It was a viable way to get to their destination. But, to the suggestion of the elder succubus, Mark shook his head in disagreement. That will be faster, but it's better not to increase our enemies, right? Mark stared in front. We are not here to fight. The fighting comes later against that giant crocodile. Mark would not mind fighting if it was the easiest way. However, there was nothing wrong with not instigating one in this situation. In the first place, they better conserve their energy for the bigger fight they would undergo soon. The ones that maintained the barrier here were not the enemies. It was the infected god's servant. They should fight. But how are we going to enter? Elia asked. I doubt they will just let us through. Let's see the situation first, then take action depending on what happens. Mark answered. Of course, even though Mark said those words, he was sure of something. Them being demons would definitely be welcomed with hostility. Let's call them first, Mark said as he let out a crystal. Wait, you're not going to let it rain again, would you? Spera hurriedly asked, seeing the familiar crystal with a bluish glowing orb inside. Of course not. Mark shrugged while looking at Spera. There is no need to, is there? And there, Mark released the magical energy of the Stormcaller mental crystal. Mark had the same reason as before. This crystal was not that suited for fighting. This made him not hesitate to release the crystal's magical energy for these kinds of things. The strong magical energy enveloped the surroundings immediately. Even the barrier showed vibrations. Of course, it was far from breaking just from this. It was not the intention in the first place. And as Mark wanted, the invisible barrier showed signs of movement. Vibrations became visible in the empty space at the base of the mountain. It was as if the air became water, perturbed by a rock that fell in it. Mark's group watched the scene. Slowly, the invisible barrier became visible, and like a very thin veil, it swayed sideward. A woman came out, walking on the grassy ground barefooted. Seeing the woman, however, Mark could not help but feel weird. It would not be surprising if the woman was another Dewata. After all, in Philippine myths, Dewatas were known to rule sacred mountains. And the woman's aura was similar to the Dewatas Mark met so far. However, this Dewata also looked and felt different. The Dewatas Mark met before all wore light, white dresses resembling purity and beauty. The one in front of them was the opposite, wearing a long, black gown that was dragged along the ground. And more than anything else, while she did have the aura and magical energy of a Dewata, she also carried a bit of the chilling aura of death. The black-dressed Dewata was not the only one that came out of the barrier. As the opening of the barrier widened, it revealed many creatures following her. There was a wide variety of magical creatures, both known and unknown. Among them, there were two magical races with the most number. One race appeared to be a centaur. However, while having a human torso, their heads were still of a horse. Furthermore, their horse bodies had wings. The other race seemed to be women, each having less than 3 feet in height. All of them floated in the air, exhibiting their long, flaming hair. Aside from these strange creatures, there were also sylphs and other races that Mark had seen in other places. By the looks of it, there was no need for Mark to call them. They should have known that Mark's group had arrived outside their barrier. However, they did not go out immediately since they had to gather their forces for the welcome party. It also seemed like she was really wary of Mark's group to call up an army like this. Looks like they really aren't friendly, Ilya said with a bitter smile. What's with the lineup? Are they going to war or something? Ilya was not really afraid. With Chemetris standing in front of her, there was no way she would be. Not to mention she was a good combatant herself. Everyone else could not help but feel a bit intimidated. They immediately readied in case a battle broke out without warning. As for Mark, he stared at the magical races gathered in front of him. I kinda expected to see Bentuhangans and Burlakas, since they are natives of this island, but there's quite a number here. Mark murmured. Even so, most of his attention was on the strange-looking Dewata. The bodies of Dewatas were like other elemental and spiritual races. It was made of magical energy, and their appearance and clothing would change depending on the magical energy they had. One good example was Artenaris, the leader of the half-breeds. She was a half-Dewata and a half-demon, resulting in her odd appearance and clothing. This Dewata that was in front of them, however, she did not have an aura belonging to a demon. She literally had the chilling aura of death, which likely caused her unique appearance. What does a group of demons need from our sacred grounds? The Dewata asked with a chilling tone. For demons to dare brave a god's abode. The Dewata sure sounded condescending, even though not everyone in Mark's group understood her. Like usual, these earthly deities looked down on demons. Even though she was speaking using spirit language, May and the others could sense her hostility. Nonetheless, while she was not showing it, Mark could detect a high level of cautiousness in the woman, especially when her eyes fell on him and Chemetris. It seemed that this Diwata was quite adept in perceiving the strength of individuals in front of her, which could be why she immediately amassed this army of hers. Mark stared at the Diwata. There was no need to beat around the bush. We want to pass through. Our destination is the realm of Kaptan, the Kahilwayan. At Mark's statement, it was not only the Diwata, every member of her entourage was surprised. I do not know what your intention in finding the Kahilwayan is, but there is no way we will let you, demons, enter. Not in our sacred grounds, nor in the realm of the supreme sky god. Well, this could be rough. Ilya murmured as she glanced at Mark. She had heard it from other magical creatures she knew in the past, but the earthly deities of the Philippines sure were stuck up towards demons. Do you really want to fight us? Mark asked. I'm pretty sure that you know that you won't win. You will just uselessly waste the lives of your people protecting the abode of a dead god. Impertinent! How dare you disrespect the supreme sky god? The Diwata sure was angry at Mark for calling Kaptan a dead god. And to this, Mark smiled. Well, he was not fond of getting shouted at or the like, it was just. Mark determined that this Diwata was a devout servant of the ancient Visayan gods. It makes things easier then, Mark said to the Diwata's surprise and confusion. While Mark said their intentions in a way that would tell he did not intend to fight, it was easier for demons to fight than negotiate. Thus, the Diwata readied to give the signal to her people. However, Mark thought differently. Instead, he outstretched his hand forward, revealing the item inside his enclosed fist. Hey, you're the one who suggested for us to go find Kahilwayan. Can you get your minions to make way? Mark spoke at the item, making everyone, even the members of his group, confused. After all, none of them knew of the item and why it was with him. But then, the item on Mark's hand pulsated and began to float above his palm. The aura of death began to envelop the surroundings. It was the very same aura that the Diwata with the black dress bore. And surely, feeling the aura, the Diwata began shaking. It was not in fear or anger. It was nostalgia. At the center of the surging aura of death, a figure emerged. It was a woman, who also wore a black dress. She carried the same but a stronger aura of death. Staring at the figure, the Diwata stared with her eyes widely opened in shock. It did not take long before the first tear fell from her eyes. Mother! The Diwata called out to the figure, causing surprise to everyone present.